He was the main author of the Declaration of Independence, and surprisingly, he would pass away 50 years to the day after that famous document was signed. He would also become our third president of the United States, but he clearly was much more proud of the work he did on that famous document than being president of the United States. His beloved home was called Monticello, which means little mountain in Italian. Today, we're going to take a look at Thomas Jefferson's beloved home, Monticello, during the American Civil War. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. And today I am in front of the Jefferson Memorial here in Washington, D.C. And if you're asking yourself, well, if we're going to talk about Monticello during the American Civil War, why aren't we at Thomas Jefferson's home? And there is a very, very good and at the same time horrible explanation for that, which I will explain at the end of this video. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to film talking about Monticello. The best I can do is here at the Jefferson Memorial here in Washington, D.C. It's kind of a cold January day. I'm filming on January 13th, 1 week before the inauguration, and I can tell you, having driven around the city, they're getting prepared for it. But today we are going to talk about Thomas Jefferson's home during the American Civil War. What can we say about Monticello? Well, as already mentioned in the introduction, it means little mountain in Italian, and it literally is on a little mountain. It sits 850 feet above sea level, and the top of the mountain was cleared off to make level ground for him to build his home and have some lawn to it that's not going up a hill. So, and that was done also by slave labor for the most part. And I got to tell you, if you go to Jefferson's home, they really are working on trying to tell the whole story of Thomas Jefferson, including his relationships with his slaves, and the most famous one being Sally Heming, who there's very little doubt that he fathered some children with her, but that's a whole nother story. What else can we say about Jefferson? Well, he was governor of Virginia for a while during the American Revolution. He fled Monticello towards the end of the American Revolutionary War. The British almost captured him, but they did not. He successfully escaped. As I mentioned, he's the main author of the Declaration of Independence, and he was much more proud of that accomplishment, believe it or not, than actually being president of the United States. So as I mentioned, Thomas Jefferson would die on July 4th, 1826. He was not the only founding father to die that day, as later that same day, our second president, John Adams, would also pass away. And ironically, one of Adams's last statements was, he said, well, at least Jefferson survives. But ironically, Thomas Jefferson had already died earlier that morning. And coincidentally, only 3 U.S. presidents ever died on the 4th of July. The third would be our 5th president, James Monroe, who would pass away on July 4th, 1831. Thomas Jefferson, just like our first president, George Washington, was a Virginian and very much loved Virginia. The ironic thing here when you visit the Jefferson Memorial is that he's facing towards the city of Washington and not south towards his beloved home state of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson is a bit of an anomaly. He was opposed to slavery, but owned dozens, if not into the hundreds, of slaves during his lifetime. And he really wanted his slaves to be freed upon his death. However, Jefferson was so far in debt when he died that all but 5 of his slaves were sold off to help pay his debts. So as a result of being so far in debt when he died, his daughter, Martha Jefferson Randolph, sold Monticello 8 years after his passing to a United States naval officer, Uriah P. Levy, who was a Commodore in the United States Navy, and the house was sold for $7,500. And believe it or not, the whole kit and caboodle was sold for only $7,500, which doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot of money today. You may buy a decent used car for that amount of money, but in the early 1830s, $7,500 was a lot of money. So who was Commodore Uriah P. Levy? Well, he was an officer in the United States Navy. He was a Northerner. He was born in Philadelphia, and he was a great admirer of Thomas Jefferson. Probably that may have been the main reason why the estate decided to sell Monticello to him. He was also Jewish, which may or may not have been a factor during the battles that took place over Monticello during the American Civil War. So let's take a look at what happened to Monticello during the Civil War. Commodore Levy was born in Philadelphia, but he would die in New York City in 1862, and he would remain loyal to the Union during the War of the Rebellion. Now, when the war broke out, Levy was the owner of the property, but shortly before he died in 1862, the Confederate government seized Monticello, and they would do it basically using Confederate law to take Commodore Levy's property away from him. Shortly after the hostilities opened between North and South in 1861, the Confederate government would seize Monticello and declare it alien property because it was owned by a Northerner. And the records are kind of sketchy as to when this seizure actually took place. It took place somewhere between August of 1861 and February 8th of 1862. Commodore Levy would die on March 22nd, 1862. So at the time of his death, basically what was his home had been confiscated by the Confederate government. Now, I would like to point out that there was no battle at Monticello, much like there was no battle at Washington's home, Mount Vernon. But that doesn't mean there wasn't a battle over Monticello during the American Civil War. What I mean by that is the estate of Commodore Levy sued to get the Commodore's property back for his heirs, and that case would come to a head in 1864. The District Court of the Confederate States of America for the Eastern District of Virginia, in what is known as the case of CSA versus George Carr and Joel N. Wheeler. Now, Carr was the executor for the state for Commodore Levy, and he sued to get that property back. And Joel N. Wheeler was living at Monticello at the time in 1864, so he was included in the lawsuit because essentially if the South had won, he would be evicted and become homeless. A decision was handed down in that case on September 27th, 1864, and well, what can I say? Carr and Wheeler lost. The house would remain in the possession of the Confederate States of America into the post-war era, and on November 17th of 1864, Monticello was sold at the inflated price of $80,500 to Benjamin F. Ficklin. While there were no battles at Monticello during the Civil War, I do want to point out that towards the tail end, Union General Philip Sheridan did raid Monticello. As far as I could tell, there was no gunfiring, no gunshots. It was more of a case of maybe just the general and some of his army paying a visit to Jefferson's home. I'd also like to point out that during the war, the house did serve as a Confederate hospital. So that concludes Jefferson's home during the American Civil War. Stick around because I do want to tell you why this episode was not filmed at Monticello. It's a rather interesting story, and I just have a few other little tidbits of information about Jefferson to throw into this episode. One interesting fact about Thomas Jefferson, besides being the author of the Declaration of Independence and our third president, he was also an architect, and he loved domes. Just showed you there's a dome here on the Jefferson Memorial. That's in honor of him. His home, Monticello, has a dome, and the original the Capitol building's original dome, not the one that's there now, but the original one, I was told, was in honor of Thomas Jefferson. Interesting fact about this memorial, construction on it began in 1939, and there's a marker for that here, with the cornerstone being laid by then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Hello folks, okay, I want to take you into another part of my house that I call the Jefferson Library. I'll explain that to you in a moment. I love this quote from Thomas Jefferson: "I cannot live without books." My favorite dollar bill is without a doubt the $2 bill. I often have some of these in my wallet. There is Thomas Jefferson on the front of the $2 bill, and I love the back of it. That's the best backing of all the dollar bills here in America. The signing of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, I got a picture of the signing there. And this quote by Jefferson is the best. "The end of democracy and the defeat of the American Revolution will occur when government falls into the hands of lending institutions and moneyed incorporations." Thomas Jefferson, 1816. I've been to Monticello 3 times in my life now. The first time was when I was a young student. I think it was around 1977. I would have been about 9-10 years old at the time. My parents took me on a vacation to Colonial Williamsburg and the Yorktown battlefield, and then we shot across the Commonwealth of Virginia over to the Charlottesville area to visit Monticello. And the second time I remember very well, it was April of 1995. It was a weekend that my grandfather passed away. I happened to be in Virginia at the time, and I started rushing home. Then I realized even if I got home 45 or 60 minutes early, it wasn't going to change anything. My grandfather had already passed away. So I decided to stop off and visit Thomas Jefferson's home, and that was probably the most memorable experience I had in terms of a positive trip to Monticello. And then the last time was October of last year, when I was hoping to film this episode on the grounds at Monticello, much like I had done 11 months earlier when I filmed George Washington's home at Mount Vernon and talked about his house during the American Civil War. I wanted to do basically the same exact thing at Monticello, but stick around for a few more minutes and I'll explain what happened there. Here's another great quote from Thomas Jefferson that maybe some of today's politicians might want to pay some attention to. "History in general only informs us of what bad government is." So April of 1995, I visit Monticello, and I remembered this much about the first trip, that Thomas Jefferson loved books. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I remember the tour guide saying that at one point Jefferson owned 26,000 books. I mean, that's an incredible amount of books. The man loved to read. So when I built my personal library at home, I decided to name it the Jefferson Library, although I don't think I'm going to get to 26,000 volumes in my small personal library before I pass away. But Jefferson loved to read books. His home is very beautiful, so let's go back downstairs to the parlor and let me talk to you about my trip there in October of 2024. So let me address the 3,000-pound elephant in the living room. For those who are asking yourself, hey, why wasn't this filmed at Monticello? After all, you're talking about Jefferson's beloved home during the American Civil War. And if you're asking yourself that question, here comes the absolutely ridiculous answer. So in November of 2023, my daughter wanted to visit Washington's home for her birthday, which I made an episode, Washington's home, Mount Vernon during the American Civil War, and I thought it was a great episode. Wanted to basically duplicate that same episode at Monticello. So we go down, 3-hour drive from Gettysburg to Jefferson's home, pay the fee to get in, take their little bus up to the top of the mountain, go all through the house on the tour, and when I get done, I start filming outside. And found out the hard way that that was completely unacceptable. I was rudely met by a woman who refused to give her name, but only would identify herself as the house manager, who brought along with her a security guard, who also refused to give me his name. But after he kept insulting me and telling me I was going to get thrown out, I started filming him with my cell phone, and he had his badge, identification badge, around his neck. I could clearly see his name once I watched the video I made on my cell phone. I started recording him after he was insulting me too many times, even at the point of calling me a tyrant. Now, what his name was is unimportant. Obviously, he was not much of an English major. If he's calling me a tyrant, guess he doesn't realize that in order to be a tyrant, you have to be in some position of authority. And me as a paying guest, I'm not in any kind of authority. But to him, a tyrant was a rule breaker, and I was a rule breaker. It got pretty nasty between him and I. Luckily, cooler heads prevail. His supervisor showed up. Actually, two of his supervisors showed up. Young man, young lady who knew de-escalation, where this first security guard did not know any de-escalation tactics, and cooled things down. No, I was not thrown out or expelled. I was allowed to continue to walk over the grounds, but I had to put my camera equipment back in my car. Luckily, a fourth security guard showed up who was very nice and gave me a ride to my car where I could secure everything in the trunk of my car, and then was driven back up to the house and was able to walk around the grounds. Unfortunately, I was not able to record much. Give you an example of how ugly this got. The woman who identified herself as the house manager demanded that I delete my footage, because I actually did film the first 3 scenes that you've seen here on this episode, and I refused to do it. She actually reached for my camera, and I told her she was getting my camera over my dead body, and that really sent off the security guard. Hopefully he's moved on to other places. I don't think he should be working with people, but that's just my opinion. So talking to the security supervisors when they showed up, they instructed me that I should contact the Monticello media person, which I did. Let me explain what happened there. So taking the advice of the security supervisor, I did reach out to the Monticello media people or person, and let let's just say that was a giant brick wall. And some of this I could completely understand, and some of it I don't. I could understand that maybe they don't want hundreds of YouTubers showing up at Monticello and just recording. But if you watched my Mount Vernon episode, which I sent them a link to, I don't even like to record out in public when there's a lot of people around. I just kind of like to go do my thing, make my report, post it, and let you folks enjoy it and critique it for whether or not you think it's good or bad. I really don't like to have crowds of people around, because you always could run into that one person who gets upset that they're being recorded even though they're out in public. I understand that. But according to the Monticello media, there was a fee that was going to be attached to this, which, no, this channel really's got to produce episodes that don't cost any money other than the traveling cost. And the one that really sent me over the edge was when they said that I would have to submit my script for their review. Now, I've been studying American history since I was about 6-7 years old. I'm 57 years old right now. So I've been doing it for about 50 years. And my first love was the American Revolution. And this is a minor point, but I also have a master's in history. And it's a minor point because all that really taught me was how to do proper research. And the research that I did and the information I gleaned from most of this channel, for this episode, I should say, came from the Monticello website. So I'm just basically speaking what they had written. So to me, it was just too many brick walls, too many hurdles to jump. So I just said, okay, I did not delete the footage as they demanded. I'm not using it here for this episode, but I did use it to critique myself to try to make this episode better. And there was one other thing that really, this is almost comical. Okay, I had to take the camera off the tripod and put it on a table. So if it seems a little wobbly or anything right now, it's because the camera's not 100% steady. This is what seemed to send the first security guard, I'll phrase it like that, and also his supervisors seemed to be very, very concerned about how I got this up on top of the mountain. Yes, my tripod. Apparently, this is the equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction at Monticello. Tripods are not allowed on the grounds for whatever reason. I have no idea. That was never explained to me. So if you are planning on going to Monticello and you've got your family and you would love a group photo of your family in front of the house, you're going to have to either have one family member out of the picture so they could take the picture, or you're going to have to rely on the good nature of strangers to take the picture for you, because your tripod is not welcomed at Monticello. Okay, camera's back on the tripod. I don't want to belittle the bad experience I had with the house manager and the first security guard I came in contact with. I will sing the praises of his two supervisors, the other security guard that drove me off the mountain down to my car and back up. The supervisors were very, very nice. The person I dealt with in the media, I only dealt with that person through email. There was actually no audio contact via telephone. I don't want to beat that to death, but let me give you what I feel is a fair critique of Jefferson's home. It's beautiful. Okay, has a dome on it. He was also an inventor. There's some of his inventions inside. It's really a nice house to see, and I can understand, as a person who loves mountains, why he would love that house and its location so much. He's buried on the grounds. And I got to say, they really do seem to be doing a lot of research, ongoing research, to find out about Jefferson and his relationship with his slaves, and the most famous one, Sally Hemings. Jefferson is a bit of an anomaly. He owned slaves but despised slavery. He did not like debt, but he died over $100,000, I believe they said, in debt in 1826 money. He was very heavily in debt when he died, but he despised debt. But again, very beautiful grounds. Now, the big detraction. It was $42 for my adult ticket to get in there and get a tour of the house. And my daughter was only $4, which was a relief, but substantially more money, just comparing apples and oranges to the price I paid to get into Washington's home 11 months earlier. There was a lot more to see at Washington's home. Also very beautiful, up on a rise, bluffs overlooking the Potomac River and the Chesapeake. It was absolutely beautiful. Both homes were. However, if you're on limited time or limited budget and you can only visit one of the two historic houses, I would clearly go with Mount Vernon. Not just because they were a lot more user-friendly for this channel than Monticello was. It's just more cost-effective to visit Washington's home than Jefferson's home. That's just my opinion. But it is a beautiful home. But again, if you're choosing between visiting one president's home or the other, I would go with Mount Vernon over Monticello. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a pleasure bringing it to you. Sorry it was 3 months later than I was originally planning, but well, that's the way things happen. Monticello is privately owned, so I can't force them to open up their grounds to this channel. Just like Mount Vernon was privately owned, but Mount Vernon was a little nicer. So that's Jefferson's home during the American Civil War. It was a legal battle, not a military battle. For Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Until next time, please have a healthy and safe 2025 and do your best to keep the history alive. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.